In the aftermath of the Hunnic invasions, the geopolitical situation in Europe changed drastically. Between 370 and 453, the year of Attila's death, many Germanic and even Iranic tribes, such as the Visigoths, Gepids and Alans, migrated into Roman lands. The Vandals conquered Carthage and Roman Africa in 439, while Illyria became Ostrogothic territory, and Odoaker of the Turkilingi tribe took over Italy in 476. The Western Roman Empire was thus crumbling under external pressure, but the Hunnic Empire had also collapsed after the death of Attila, its last great king. The events further east, however, are often overlooked in contemporary history books, unjustly so, because the Huns did not suddenly disappear. On the contrary, the people who had migrated to Europe stayed, bringing with them their cultures from Central Asia. The result was the creation of several new state-like entities, from the Hungarian plains to the Danube-Caspian region. Among them was the Onogur Federation. Composed of remnants of the Hunnic Empire as well as new migrants from Asia, the Onogur Confederation laid the foundations for a Turkic presence in Eastern Europe, as well as being the predecessors of the Bulgars and perhaps even the Magyars, the ancestors of today's Hungarians and Bulgarians. Finally, the Onogur Federation served as a transition between the Hunnic era and the Göktürk era that would begin a century after Attila's death, as the Onogur presence in Ukraine would also enable a Göktürk presence on the Black Sea coast against Byzantium. It is time to unravel their story once and for all. We will delve deeper into the aftermath of the Hunnic invasions in both Western and Eastern Europe, revealing the legacy of the Huns long after the death of Attila.
Ey Türk! Üstte mavi gök basmasa, altta yağız yer delinmese, senin ilini, senin töreni kim bozabilir? Artık titre ve kendine dön.
Attila had left a legacy that was hard to live up to. In 452, the Hunnic Empire had reached its zenith with the invasion of northern Italy, stretching from the Ponto-Caspian region in the east to the Rhine in the west, from Pomerania in the north to the Danube in the south. It was bordered by a number of Germanic and non-Germanic tribes, mainly the Alans in the Caucasus, those who had not fled west, that is, the Ostrogoths on the Danube and in Illyria, several Slavic tribes throughout Eastern Europe, and the Saxons and Franks north and west of the Rhine, respectively. Almost all of these tribes were settled within the borders of the Western and Eastern Roman empires and served as foederati, tribes that were granted land within the Roman Empire but were forced to come to the aid of the Romans in the event of war. The Romans made such pacts by signing treaties with a number of Germanic tribes, and by the middle of the 5th century, there were several armies of mixed Roman and non-Roman descent. This system may have been responsible for the fall of Rome, but that fall, as we shall see, was also the indirect cause of the Hunnic invasions decades earlier. In any case, the fall of the Hunnic Empire did not happen overnight. Under the rule of at least 3 of Attila's sons, the state survived for almost 2 more decades. The 3 brothers mentioned in ancient sources, such as the text of Jordanes, are Elek, Dengizish, and Ernak. The exact details of the division are not well recorded, but it's clear that these sons lacked the leadership and political savvy that Attila had. They were unable to forge the kind of alliances or command the same level of respect as their father. Attila had held his empire together not only through loyalty or a sense of shared identity, but also through fear and military might. With Attila gone, many of these tribes, such as the Gepids and Ostrogoths, saw an opportunity to assert their independence. The Huns were now led by Attila's son Elak, and a certain Onegesios, the minister of the Hunnic kings and secret power figure behind the scenes. Elak's forces fought primarily against the Gepids in the Battle of Nidau in 454 CE. Nidau was, perhaps, a tributary of the Sava River. The Gepids were led by Ardaric, who had been a vassal under Attila but sought independence after his death. Other Germanic tribes included the Heruli, Rugi, Suebi, the latter of which had fought alongside the Huns during the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains. At this point in time, the Ostrogoths, led by Valamir, were still on the side of the Huns. But after losing the battle and with Elek being killed on the battlefield, the Hunnic realm quickly disintegrated. Next, Valimir also revolted, and his Ostrogoths successfully gained independence from the Huns by 457, instead becoming foederati of the Eastern Roman Empire. To quote Jordanus, our main source for this time period, since young minds are excited by the chance to snatch power, the heirs of Attila began contesting the kingship. All desiring to rule autonomously, they destroyed the empire simultaneously. Attila's sons demanded that the subject nations be divided among them in order that, as with household property, warlike kings and their people might be distributed by lot. Some Huns retreated to the regions east of the Dnieper, while others stayed in the Pannonian Basin and Thrace. But the struggle for survival was not over. Now Dengizic took over the rule of the Hunnic Empire. He hunted down the traitorous Ostrogoths and dealt a heavy blow to an Ostrogothic army in the same year. When the Eastern Romans refused to allow a Hunnic envoy to set up a market on the Roman part of the Danube, Dengizic threatened to invade Thrace unless he was given land and subsidies. He bypassed negotiations with Anagast, a local defender, and sent diplomats directly to Emperor Leo. Leo, in turn, indicated a willingness to negotiate if Dengizic showed obedience. In 467, Dengizic crossed the frozen Danube, expecting support from the southern Huns, but was instead joined by independent groups of Goths, some of whom were still under Hunnic rule after the Battle of Nidau. The Roman generals Basiliscus, Anagast, Ostries, and the Hun, General Chelchal, besieged the Goths and Huns in a valley. The Huns, suffering from hunger, offered to surrender in exchange for land. Chelchal led the Goths to believe that the land would be for the Huns, among them only, which led the Goths to kill the Huns in their midst. This led to a chaotic battle in which the Huns realized the deception and managed to break through the Roman lines and escape the siege. In the aftermath, the Ostrogoths under Valimir attempted to reintegrate their Gothic kin within the Hunnic Empire into their own tribe, and with 100,000 warriors defeated the 20,000-strong Hunnic army of Dengizic at the Battle of Bassiani in modern Serbia in 468. This last battle was the final nail in the coffin of the Hunnic Empire. Other Huns, such as the Caucasian Huns, continued to rule. But the great Hun Empire of Europe was no more. It had fragmented into a conglomerate of several Turkic and Germanic tribes. Little did the Eastern Roman Empire realize that the spirit of the Huns had not disappeared. The Huns swept across Europe, displacing the Alans, Goths, and Gepids, and settling in the Pannonian Basin. In response, some tribes allied themselves with the Western Roman Empire, while the Vandals moved south and west from Poland and eastern Germany. After crossing the Rhine in 406 CE and defeating the Franks, they occupied parts of Spain but were driven out by the Visigoths. Their path took a significant turn when they crossed the Straits of Gibraltar into North Africa in 429, with an army of 15,000 to 20,000, led by their king Genseric. Genseric eventually established a kingdom around ancient Carthage in modern Tunisia. Genseric also conquered Sardinia and Corsica, as well as the Balearic Islands. By the time the Romans were exhausted from keeping Attila out of Rome in 452, and with Attila's death only a year later, it was too late to reorient Roman foreign policy towards the Vandals in the south. The Vandals went one step further and attacked and sacked Rome in 455. Contrary to popular belief, this sack of Rome was not as brutal as it is often made out to be. After all, the words ravage and vandalism have been taken from the Vandals' actions as synonyms for destruction, unfairly. Genseric did not burn the city to the ground, and the Vandals refrained from massacring the civilian population. However, several temples and buildings were destroyed, and a significant number of civilians were shipped to Africa to be sold as slaves within the Vandal kingdom. After a Roman invasion force of at least 50,000 men and over 1,000 ships was defeated at the Battle of Cape Bon at the gates of Tunisia, the Romans abandoned their attacks on the Vandals, and the latter consolidated their own kingdom in North Africa. The Hunnic invasions indirectly led to the Vandal sack of Rome in 455 and their control of North Africa. Despite fending off Attila, Rome was financially drained, leaving its armies unsustainable. Descended from the Turkilingi tribe, which had a rather suspicious and certainly non-Germanic name with the prefix Turk, Odoaker led the Western Foederati and was subordinate to the Roman statesman and magister Militum Orestes. According to J.B. Bury, the Germanic tribes under Roman rule wished to have roofs and lands of their own, and they petitioned Orestes to reward them for their services by granting them lands and settling them permanently in Italy. But when Orestes refused, and at the same time proclaimed his son Romulus Augustus as the new Roman emperor, the Foederati turned to Odoaker to lead their revolt against Orestes. Odoaker killed him at Placentia, near Ravenna, and was declared king in August 476 by the Foederati, Scyrians, Heruli, and even segments of the Roman army. At the same time, Odoaker did not massacre the Romans or burn cities. Instead, he forced the 16-year-old Romulus Augustus into exile, thankfully not without giving him substantial sums of gold to sustain his costs of daily life. Odoaker then established his own rule over Italy as King of Italy in Ravenna and integrated his people into the Roman administrative system. Again, Bury points out, it is most important to note that Odoaker established his political power with the cooperation of the Roman Senate, and this body seems to have given him its loyal support throughout his reign. The Goths played a central role in these barbarian invasions. Hailing from southern Scandinavia and Rugilia, the Goths split during the Hun invasion in the late 4th century. While many of the Goths migrated westwards, others sought refuge in the Eastern Roman Empire. The Goths thus split into the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths. Alaric the Visigoth is perhaps the most famous of all Visigoth kings, having successfully sacked Rome in 409 before dying of illness shortly afterwards. By the 450s, Theodoric had taken power. He had helped stop Attila's Huns from advancing into Gaul at the Battle of the Catalanian Plains, but was killed on the battlefield. His successors, including his son Theodoric II and Euric, managed to further expand the Visigothic Empire and establish complete political independence from Rome after serving as foederati. The Ostrogoths, however, were forced to settle in Illyria. In time, a number of Ostrogoths had grown up and received higher education in Rome, including a certain Theodoric, not to be confused with the other Theodoric in the west. The Ostrogoths served as Rome's partners against the advancing forces of Odoaker, the most important of all the Germanic kings. By now, the Ostrogoths were becoming wary of the geographical situation. Theodoric, who had grown up and left Rome, was the leader of his people. Although under the influence of the Eastern Romans, he led the Ostrogoths into battle against them. During the siege of Constantinople in 487, he emphasized the need for his people to live outside tribal Illyria. Theodoric wanted to gain prestige and respect, but not necessarily occupy Constantinople itself. Zeno was emperor in Constantinople at the time and decided to kill two birds with one stone. He suggested that Theodoric should stop attacking Constantinople and instead march into Italy to overthrow Odoaker, with whom he was at odds. There, Theodoric could settle his Ostrogothic tribe without interference. With the support of the Rugians, Theodoric's Ostrogothic army won two decisive battles against Odoaker's forces. After 3 years of back and forth in northeastern Italy, Odoaker admitted defeat and finally surrendered in 493. Theodoric's Ostrogoths entered Ravenna and celebrated the occasion with a banquet, to which the Turkilingi and others had been invited too. Theodoric was to be officially crowned the new king of Italy. Then suddenly, Theodoric drew his longsword and killed Odoaker on the spot. His loyal followers were not spared either. This bloody event marked the beginning of Theodoric's reign over the Italian peninsula, which would last for 3 decades. Known as a builder and a wise statesman, Theodoric upheld Roman traditions despite his barbarian origins. Several other Germanic tribes were still roaming Europe, such as the Burgundians and the Alemanni, while others, such as the Franks, were working to expand their settled empires. However, while the rise of the Germanic kingdoms coincided with the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the situation in the east was quite different. Here, the Eastern Roman Empire, known as Byzantium, stood tall against outside invasions. Nevertheless, the Eastern Romans could not prevent developments along the shores of the Black Sea, as the Ponto-Caspian region formed the basis for a permanent Turkish presence. As we mentioned in the last episode, the Huns integrated several non-Hunnic peoples into their empire. The nucleus tribe of the Huns, however, was most likely of Oghuric Turkic origin. This means that they spoke an early version of Oghuric, one of the 4 major branches of the Turkic languages. As the Hunnic Empire disintegrated after Attila's death, his Hunnic people also dispersed. Some remained in Hungary, while others roamed within the borders of modern Ukraine and beyond. Some Huns retained their identity, while others were completely assimilated by neighboring cultures. But a little further east, the Hunnic legacy continued to be carried on by tribes that had either been part of the Hunnic Empire or had served as subjects on its eastern fringes. After the fall of the Hunnic Empire, a new state arose on the Danube called Onogur. The name means 10 tribes in Turkic, and this in turn implies the number of tribes that were part of this federation. Bordering on the Onogur territory, several more tribes were registered by ancient scholars from Byzantium to be in proximity of Onogur influence, among them the Kutrigurs, the Utigurs, the Akatsiri, the Tatachi, and on the greater periphery, the Sabirs and Saragurs. The Oghuric Turkic linguistic ties served as a foundational element in the cultural evolution of the Onogur and other related tribes. Language often serves as a medium through which social norms, traditions, and values are transmitted. Sharing a linguistic heritage with the Huns meant that certain social structures, mythologies, and perhaps even governance models would have been carried over. Examples would be the common religion of Tengrism and the common Oghuric Turkic language. This shared language could have facilitated the sharing of military tactics, social norms, and even legal codes, forming an initial bridge of trust and common understanding, which would then lead to greater coherence in joint military or economic endeavors. However, after watching our videos, you may have noticed that the most threatening enemies of Turkic tribes were, in turn, other Turkic tribes. We should not mistake the Onogurs for a Turkic society with closed borders and without any societal conflict. However, we can indeed state that the tribes harbored by the Onogurs were certainly more safe within this state than on the borders of other non-Turkic peoples. Continuing with the political structure of the Onogurs, we can further give information by taking other tribal federations of the Eurasian steppe belt as a standard model, one that was imitated over and over again during that era, from the Xianbei in Manchuria to the Huns in Hungary. The tribes in this region were not insular entities. Rather, they engaged in recurrent interactions, forming unions or confronting each other in various conflicts. Furthermore, we have actual historical accounts about the Onogur Federation, mainly from Nikephoros, Theophanes, Simocates, and from our old friend Priscus of Panium, who was introduced in the last episode. In summary, they state the following. The federative structure of the Onogur is likely a combination of both political innovation and inheritance from their Hunnic predecessors. The Huns were known for their loose confederation of various tribes, with the core Huns providing 2 kings for the east and west, respectively. Their model had proven successful in managing a large, diverse set of groups, only to be centralized fully with the ascension of Attila. The Onogurs could have borrowed this structure because of its effectiveness in ensuring internal cohesion and flexibility in military campaigns. However, the Onogurs were situated in a different geographical and political context. Now that the central authority in the western part of the Eurasian steppe belt was gone, the Hunnic tribes had to rely on their own capabilities to keep off invaders. Luckily for them, the Eastern Roman Empire did not seek to conquer their lands, perhaps due to the never-ending pressure that was emanating from the Germanic tribes in the west. In the 5th century, Onogurs, along with other tribes, conveyed to the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople about their displacement from their homeland by the Sabirs, who were themselves threatened by the Avars in Inner Asia. The Avars, it has often been assumed, were actually the Ruran from the Ruran Khaganate. However, It can be argued that the Roran only later intermingled with the Avars by force and then declared their new Khaganate in Eastern Europe, after the Gökturks had taken over the actual Roran Empire in East Asia and driven away Roran nobility to the west and south, respectively. In any case, the tribes within the Onogur sphere were now to be traced to the Tile and Dingling groups, all Turkic and predominantly situated in western Siberia and Kazakhstan initially. These tribes eventually settled in parts corresponding to modern Ukraine, having been granted land by Emperor Leo the Firm. This all happened while Ernak, the Hunnic king, was still in power. Later on, the so-called Saragurs, which corresponds to white tribes in Turkic, also arrived in the area. The connection of the Saragurs and Onogurs and the integration with the Kutrigurs, Utigurs, and Bulgars in the same vicinity resulted from a prolonged amalgamation process. During this period, the Onogurs were a significant faction in a large Bulgar confederation, merging with remnants of other local tribes. In the 6th century, Jordanes highlighted their involvement in the marten skin trade, a commodity used as a currency substitute at that time, indicating their proximity to forests and interactions with Finno-Ugrian communities. The Onogurs were further involved in various geopolitical events, including the Avar and Gökturk conquests in Western Eurasia. When the Gökturks declared a limited war on the Byzantine Empire, it was the Onogurs who assisted them in besieging Cherson on the Crimean Peninsula. In the mid-7th century, Kubrat united the Onogurs into the old Great Bulgar Empire. Kubrat rebelled against the Avars, founding a state known as the Onogunda Bulgar state in Italy by 700. The Bulgars also referred to themselves as Onogundurs. As more and more tribes were once again migrating into the west, often alongside the Avars and later the Bulgars, the term Ogur became known in Central Europe. Thus, in early German sources, people who had settled in and around the Pannonian Basin and spoke Turkic became the Ungarn, which later became the name of Hungary. Contrary to popular belief, the name of Hungary does not stem from the Huns, but from the Odoaker state. These people referred to themselves as Magyars, however, to this very day. In the aftermath of the Hunnic invasions, the dissolution of their realm gave rise to diverse power centers such as the Visigothic and Ostrogothic kingdoms, the kingdom of Odoaker, and the Vandal Empire. Concurrently, the Onogur Federation and the arrival of the Gökturks introduced Turkic elements to the Eurasian steppe. This pivotal period from 453 to 560 shaped the geopolitical landscape, influencing both European and Eurasian histories. Challenging traditional narratives, it's pertinent to reevaluate whether these so-called barbarian entities were, in fact, as disruptive as once thought, or whether they contributed to the socio-political tapestry in a more nuanced manner. When the barbarian label is critically examined, a more nuanced understanding of these post-Hunnic and post-Roman entities emerges. The term barbarian is heavily laden with connotations of cultural and civilizational inferiority. Yet many of these groups had complex social hierarchies, legal systems, and artistic achievements. For example, the Ostrogothic kingdom under Theodoric the Great was renowned for its contributions to architecture and governance, integrating Roman law into its administration. Similarly, the Vandals in North Africa were not mere destroyers but builders of a kingdom with its own maritime strength and economic policies. Re-evaluating the barbarian label significantly impacts our understanding of the European Dark Ages. The term Dark Ages itself is often criticized as a Eurocentric misnomer that dismisses the complex cultural, scientific, and social developments that were happening outside the Roman spheres. The Onogur Federation, in turn, holds a significant place in the annals of Turkic history, as well as in the broader Eurasian steppe and European context. While its tribes are less well known than other Turkic states like the Gökturk Khaganate, they played a key role in shaping the dynamics of the Ponto-Caspian steppe and its neighboring regions. For example, they helped pave the way for other Turkic states, contributing to the larger Turkic diaspora that would later populate areas from Anatolia to Eastern Europe. The Gökturks and after them, the Khazars, the Pechenegs, the Kipchaks and Cumans on their way to the west arrived in places where Turkic had literally become the lingua franca, and Tengrism was the faith with the most followers. On the other hand, Onogur contacts with the Eastern Roman Empire and the early Slavic polities influenced the geopolitical landscape west and south of their territory, making them an integral part of Eastern European history too. By existing as a relatively friendly entity at the edge of the Byzantine sphere of influence, the Onogurs served as a buffer against other, potentially more hostile tribes. This had a stabilizing effect on the Byzantine Empire's northern frontier, especially at the time of Justinian the Great, who was busy with reconquering former Roman territories in the west and south, respectively. The spread of the Oghuric language into Eastern Europe would also pave the way for another group of nomadic equestrians coming in from Central Asia, the Avars.